Life has a way of blindsiding you, turning your carefully constructed plans into a tangled mess of chaos. I thought I had it all figured out: a stable career, a loving family, and a predictable rhythm to my days. Growing up, I'd watched my parents stumble through their relationship, vowing I'd never let that happen to me. Yet here I was, navigating a landscape of shattered dreams and unanswered questions. Before everything unraveled, weekends were reserved for family outings. My wife, Adelia, and I would take our daughters to the park or explore a new hiking trail. It felt like we were the picture-perfect family. I wasn't naive enough to think we'd never have problems, but I didn't expect the foundation to crack so abruptly. Looking back now, the signs were there. Subtle at first. A certain distance in her gaze, her laughter less spontaneous. By the time it became undeniable, I was too deep in my routine to notice. Adelia had already started to drift, and I didn't realize I was losing her until it was far too late. It's been over 5 years since the day Adelia, my wife of 15 years, and once a respected branch manager at a prominent bank, announced she wanted out of our marriage. Her reasoning was straightforward, almost clinical. "I don't love you anymore," she said. "There's no one else. We've simply grown apart." I had my doubts, but I couldn't prove anything. Soon after, I overheard her talking on her cell about big changes coming into her life. We agreed to joint custody of our daughters, then 14 and 12, both of whom chose to live with her. I was reminded of all this when I saw an article in US Today this Thursday. It featured Adelia Lynn Peterson, now the regional VP, and her husband Ronald Peterson, a senior VP, at a charity event in New York. Their daughters, Amanda and Miranda, now 19 and 17, were also there, described as up-and-comers. Adelia had the status she always wanted. The article said she was highly sought after in social circles, and I recognized Ronald as a former acquaintance from when he and Adelia worked together at the local Bank of America branch. Our daughters were now living under a different last name. I wanted to confirm what I saw, so I planned to ask my assistant, Helen Beard, for help, but she was off that day. Then I remembered something from our divorce proceedings. Adelia had failed to show up on the day the divorce was to be finalized. The judge insisted we both testify, but her lawyer claimed she had been transferred out of state. When I was asked if I had given permission for our daughters to leave the state, I said no. That's when the nightmare truly began. Judge McDonald's tone shifted immediately. He asked me to try calling my family, so I went outside to use my cell. All the numbers I had for them were disconnected, and when I checked their Facebook pages, I found I'd been blocked. I told my lawyer everything. The judge immediately issued an arrest warrant for Adelia, charging her with parental abduction. He paused the divorce until she appeared in court with the children. Adelia's lawyer argued it was no big deal and suggested I might be lying, but the judge was firm. "That's why she should be here," he said, "with both their daughters." During the police investigation, I learned that Adelia's family had claimed I was mistreating our daughters, though there was no evidence to back it up. Social services, however, had found nothing to suggest any misuse. The rumors spread by Adelia's family had taken root in town. Over the years, Judge McDonald and I stayed in touch, bonding over fly fishing. So when I dropped by to see him that evening, I brought the newspaper article with me. "Look at this," I said, showing him the photo of Adelia and her new family. The judge went pale. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. The next photo was of my daughters, now with different last names. The judge immediately made calls to the FBI. "Why didn't the bank help you find her?" Ruth, the judge's wife, asked. "They got a federal court ruling saying it was a family matter and they didn't have to comply with the order," I replied. I left soon after, telling the judge to call me in the morning. It had been a long, emotional night. I couldn't help but wonder, was there more to Adelia and Ronald's relationship than just friendship? I never imagined it back then, when she was hired as a loan officer and I was starting my consulting business. The question lingered. With my daughter's name changes, were they really mine or his? Did either of us know the truth? I tried to push the doubts aside, remembering that Amanda had been born before Adelia started working at the bank. The next morning, I couldn't help but focus on Helen. Over the past 5 years, her dislike for her cousin had only deepened. I knew Helen believed me, and her actions proved it. More than once, I wanted to tell her how I felt, but I never did. She deserved someone better, someone who wasn't caught in the nightmare I was living. Helen was beautiful. Her auburn hair, warm smile, and kind heart were everything a good man could ask for. I daydreamed about her, but I knew I couldn't ask her to share my burdens. The next day at work kept me distracted until Helen knocked and let in 2 FBI agents. "John, there are 2 gentlemen here from the FBI. Shall I let them in?" "Of course, I've been expecting them," I replied, standing up. "I'm Mac Holmes, and this is Douglas Drysdale," Mac said. "We need to gather some background on your situation." I explained how I met her current husband years ago. While I didn't think there had been an affair then, with my daughter's name changes and their current relationship, it raised questions. "The only way to know the truth is to have DNA tests for all of us," I said. "I thought Amanda was born before Adelia worked at the bank, but now I wondered if Adelia had known Ronald even earlier." I continued. "Judge McDonald stopped the divorce proceedings after charging Adelia with parental abduction. She ignored a court order by not showing up." "Did she file for divorce in New York and marry him?" Douglas asked. I confirmed the divorce hadn't been granted because Adelia had failed to appear. "The court records will show that Judge Donald doesn't tolerate nonsense," I added. "He's tough. He learned that lesson the hard way with a corrupt lawyer years ago." "Did you give your wife permission to move out of state with the children?" Mac asked. "No," I said. "Her lawyer told us she moved out of state, and the judge asked me to try calling them. When I did, their numbers were disconnected, and I was blocked on Facebook." "So, she moved before the divorce was final and married soon after," Douglas remarked. "Exactly," Mac said. "This was all planned." "It wasn't a mistake," Douglas added. "It contradicts what we heard in her interview in New York." "When was the last time you heard from your wife?" Douglas asked. 2 weekends before the final court hearing," I explained. "Adelia and the girls took the last of their things from our house. Child Services had interviewed them, and they chose to live with her. Since then, I haven't received any legal or public notice," I added. "So, I assume I'm still not divorced." "That means someone forged your signature on their adoption papers," Max said. "We can charge them both with covering up a federal crime." I asked about the adoption papers, but they didn't answer. "Mr. Masters, could you provide us with your signature?" Mac asked. "Helen, please prepare a letter on our letterhead, verifying my compliance with their request for my signature," I instructed. "Make sure to witness it and make a copy for our records before handing over the original." "Do you still live at 87654 Yale Road East?" Mac asked. "No," I replied. "I had to get a court order to sell it." "The police were tired of the rumors about me being a sexual offender," I continued. "After I was attacked and hospitalized for the 2nd time, Judge McDonald helped me get the order. I now live at Ryder Lake, a private place with 5 acres and security." I updated Helen on everything. She was shocked to learn her cousin had been found, and her eyes filled with hope and questions, but there was still so much unknown. "Helen, when I leave tonight, I'll shut off my cell. If you need me, call my home number in an emergency," I said. Helen despised her cousin Adelia for ruining a good man's life and reputation. She had seen John lose friends and family to the lies Adelia spread. It frustrated her to wait for the truth to come out. But after everything she'd witnessed, she knew lies were often accepted as truth. John had focused solely on work after his marriage fell apart. His consulting business had grown 3-fold, but 2 years ago, he started emerging from his shell. Still, what surprised Helen most was that since Adelia and the kids left, she hadn't heard John mention their names once. Not until today. She had watched him deteriorate, and now he was a shadow of his former self. Helen was 14 when she first met John Masters, a 19-year-old at a pre-Christmas family gathering. Adelia had just announced their engagement, and the attention was all on her. Helen immediately knew their relationship wouldn't last. John, a successful financial planner, put family first, while Adelia, a social climber, always needed to be the center of attention. Helen had predicted their marriage would fall apart once their kids hit their teens, and she was right. Helen's own marriage had ended tragically when her husband died while serving in the military before they could start a family. Afterward, she turned to John for support. He helped her through the hardest times, becoming both her boss and her closest friend. Over the last 5 years, as John endured his own personal hell, Helen realized she wanted to grow old with him. John's main struggle was that he couldn't escape his past, a past controlled by the actions of others. Rumors had spread when Adelia and the kids disappeared. Some even believed John had liquidated them to protect his reputation. People thought the reason for his extensive security was that their bodies were hidden on his property. One night, I stopped at Ruby Tuesdays for dinner, ordering the salad bar and catfish. I had just returned to my table when Adelia's father, Roger, appeared uninvited. He sat down without asking. I heard from Adelia this morning, Roger said. I didn't respond, just kept eating. The last time he'd spoken to me in public, he had threatened to eliminate me for allegedly mistreating his granddaughters. Public scenes like that only fueled the rumors. Amanda and Miranda are doing well, Roger continued. Adelia finally admitted to me that you never touched your kids the way she accused you. She used that lie as an excuse to disappear. I want to find a way to apologize to you. He paused. She's telling the family that I'll believe them once they give me a notarized statement explaining everything. I put down my fork and looked at him. Once they do that and come to my office, I'll believe them. Until then, this conversation is pointless. You're all dead to me. Damn, that's harsh, John, Roger said. Well, I'm just treating you how you've treated me these last 5 years. Think about that and leave me to eat in peace. I've been slandered by your family for something I didn't do, I added. I watched him walk away, irritated. Did he think a 2-minute conversation could undo 5 years of pain? Did they really think I'd let it all slide? A few minutes later, the waitress who had served me sat down. Mr. Masters, I went to school with your daughters. I overheard the conversation just now, and I have to tell you, neither of them knew what was going on that Friday before they disappeared. I saw the man who just left working with other family members while they packed up. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said. She smiled and returned to work. When I paid the bill, I tipped her generously. I spent the weekend fishing, catching and releasing my limit. Fresh rainbow trout with eggs and toast became my favorite meal. On Monday morning, I was at work early, making coffee and reading the Us Today newspaper, disappointed that nothing significant had been reported. Helen showed up half an hour early, practically glowing with excitement. She poured herself some coffee and joined me. Looking back, Adelia and I got married right after high school. Amanda came about a year later. I spent the first few years flipping houses, while she started as a bank teller and worked her way up in finance. When Miranda was born, I had my future all planned, I said. Helen nodded. I heard what you told Roger Friday. Hell, everyone did. My phone rang nonstop all weekend, I replied. Do you blame him? After everything the family's done to him, he's become a pariah here. Helen looked serious. I've got one question, boss. Why are you asking for notarized statements? Public slander, I said with a smile. Oh, crap, she said. You're going after everything she has, aren't you? That's the only way to clear my name, I replied. And I'm freezing their assets until the suit is resolved. They'll be forced to rely on a public defender. Do you really want to go to federal court with a free lawyer? Helen asked. Well, boss, this week's going to be interesting, she said. If everyone who called me follows through, we'll have about 20 people. Most of the family are decent, honest people, she continued. The problem is they've accepted the lies as truth. I told them to think about it at church on Sunday. The question is, will their guilt make them do what's right? As Helen walked to her desk, she turned with a playful smile and said, Boss, some of us single girls actually enjoy a quiet morning fishing for the first time in years. I couldn't help but laugh. Before leaving for the day, I told Helen, thanks for putting a smile on my face. She was my rock. If it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't have survived the last 5 years. By Thursday afternoon, we had 24 notarized statements, all confirming that Adelia had told people she left because I had been mistreating our daughters. She had claimed she filed for divorce on those grounds, but anyone who checked the court documents would see the truth. Some had helped her sneak away with the kids, promising to keep quiet. This week, they admitted that everything she had said about me was a lie. I believed Adelia was scared of losing the new life she had created and felt no guilt for what she had done. If I hadn't caught sight of her in the paper, she would have continued as if nothing happened. My daughters, who hadn't tried to contact me, must have believed whatever Adelia had told them. At this point, my only hope was finding some satisfaction in seeing justice served. It was clear I had been erased from my daughters' lives, just like the rest of the family had done. Helen had tracked down their legal address, workplace, and financial details. Your appointment with the lawyer is at 2. Make sure Adelia gets served before anything else happens. Also, ask for an order to freeze their assets, she instructed. I thought, Helen, you're covering everything. God help Adelia if you ever meet her in person. I returned to the office at 4:30 carrying a bottle of chilled champagne and 2 glasses. The lawyer Helen recommended was on board. I handed her everything: court records, stenographer's notes, signed affidavits, and the warrant for Adelia's arrest. I also included the news article showing my wife's new life. When the lawyer found out about Bank of America's role, she suggested we sue them too. As long as one lawsuit covers the other, I'm in, I said. She smiled. Okay, it's on. We shared the champagne as we chatted when the phone rang. Helen picked it up and mouthed, "It's the judge." I turned on the speaker. "Hi, Donald, how's it going?" I asked. "Good, all things considered," he replied. "I wanted to let you know the FBI is moving forward with a grand jury against Adelia and Ronald Peterson next Wednesday. They'll also seek to bring Miranda Peterson into protective custody and request DNA tests for everyone involved. Your older daughter is legally an adult now, so she's beyond their control," the judge added. "Thanks for the update," I said. He continued. "Regarding your divorce, I'll grant it with favorable terms the moment I have Adelia in court, even if it's by video link." Helen added, "I'm holding her accountable for her actions. It's a serious matter." "Can the judge jail her?" I asked. "The abduction charges fall under the FBI's jurisdiction, but he can rule on the contempt charge for not showing up," Helen explained. "I have no idea what the law allows there," I said. "Guess we'll have to wait and see," Helen replied, her voice tinged with sadness. 5 more weeks won't change anything. At least it gives my lawyer time to work," I said. By the following Thursday, my lawyer had successfully served the papers to Adelia and Ronald at their workplace, freezing all their assets. Later that day, FBI agent Doug Drysdale called to ask me to come in for a DNA test before 6 p.m. I gladly complied. On Saturday morning, while fishing on the lake, my phone rang. It was Helen. "You need to check out the U.S. Today newspaper," she said. "Adelia, Ronald, and Miranda were detained by the FBI last night at a social event." "I'm on my way to shore," I replied. "Curiosity's killing me. I need to know what charges they're facing." It took about an hour to get to the office. Helen was right. The headline read, "Abduction, under federal law. Abduction is defined as using force, deceit, or fear to hold someone captive for personal gain. It is a felony, with an average sentence of 12 years. The article went on. "This is just one of the charges against Adelia and Ronald Peterson. They are also facing legal consequences for leaving Missouri with their children without clearing it with Adelia's husband, from whom she was divorcing at the time, citing irreconcilable differences in court records." The judge issued a bench warrant for abduction after halting the divorce proceedings due to Adelia's failure to appear. The article revealed how the couple's actions ultimately led to her capture. It seems Adelia married Ronald Peterson in New York City just a week after leaving Missouri. They used John Masters' name in documents to have Ronald adopt Amanda and Miranda, but the paperwork was fraudulent, including a forged signature. The FBI now believes this was done to hide the girls in plain sight. Ronald, a senior VP at Bank of America, used his power to prevent John from locating his family, even after John tried to get the bank to release Adelia's whereabouts. The article also discussed my civil slander suit against Adelia, after she told over 20 people I'd been sexually mistreating our daughters. It touched on 2 open attempted homicide cases against me, as many believed I had liquidated 3 people who tried to damage me. The police commented, "There are 2 open attempted homicide cases, as he was the sufferer. Many here think he liquidated them and got away with it. He's also suing Bank of America and Ronald Peterson for marital interference." The article concluded with a reflection on the justice system. Doesn't the sufferer deserve justice? Probably not. In our society, criminals get the attention, but the sufferer pays the price. The article hit hard, laying out the facts. Just as I was refilling my coffee, the phone rang. It was the Southeast Missouri newspaper. I confirmed the article's accuracy. The reporter asked about my experiences over the last 5 years. I told him about the open homicide cases and how rumors had spiraled out of control. When I asked his opinion on what I'd been through, he replied, "I'd call it a living hell." It was surreal to think the nightmare might finally be over. My name was being cleared, but the damage was done. 5 years had ruined my relationship with my daughters and distanced me from my own family. When this was all behind me, I planned to sell the business and leave the area. For good, if the one person I trusted would come with me. Before leaving the office, I cut out the article and photos, scanned them, and made copies for my lawyer. Amanda Peterson was shocked when the FBI arrested her mother and stepfather. Afterward, they took her younger sister to a different vehicle. One agent explained that her father had never agreed to the adoption and that the documents bearing his signature were forgeries. Her mother was charged with parental abduction, and Ronald with abduction and aiding in a felony cover-up. Miranda would be placed in protective custody until DNA confirmed her biological father. Amanda returned home to pack, then sat at St. Louis Airport waiting for her connecting flight to Cape. She picked up a copy of US Today and read the entire article. By the time her flight landed, she was in tears. Amanda couldn't understand why her mother had hurt her father. She remembered when her mother told her father she no longer loved him and wanted a divorce. Her father had been devastated, but her mother's response was cold. Who cares? He's just a man, and there are plenty more like him. Now, reading about her mother's past relationship with Ronald, even more questions arose. As the plane began its descent, Amanda wondered if the rental car booth at the airport still had a phone. At 11 a.m., Amanda Peterson parked outside her old home, waiting for the sheriff's vehicle to leave. 2 hours later, 2 unmarked cars pulled up and blocked her in. An officer, Colt drawn, approached her car, identified himself, and ordered her to exit the vehicle with her hands raised. She complied. The taller officer demanded, "Who are you and why are you watching this place?" "I'm Amanda Peterson," she answered. "Who's your father?" he asked. "John Masters," she replied. The officer's eyes widened. "Oh, crap," he muttered. "Tom, tell Joe and Jody to put the coffee on. We need to talk." "I'm Detective Joel Smithers," the officer said. "I know your father. What brings you back here?" "Partly what happened last night and the article in US Today," Amanda said. "I have a copy in the car. Should I get it?" "Please, it'll help," Joel replied. After a quick round of coffee, Detective Smithers read the article aloud. Everyone in the room seemed stunned, except for him. "You believe my father, don't you?" Amanda asked. "I was one of the few who did," Joel answered. "The rumors about your father were already out of control by the time they started. This house was vandalized so much he had to sell. After he was attacked, we were lucky to get to him before he bled out. People here thought he'd liquidated you all." "You're telling me it drove him away?" Amanda asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Joel said. "He's living at Ryder Lake now, on 5 acres, completely fenced in. No one's seen him in town for 2 years. "How do I contact him?" Amanda wondered. "I think I know," Tom said. "I'll check if his business has an emergency contact." Minutes later, Tom returned with an address. "Do you know a Helen Beard?" he asked. "She's a second cousin of my mom. Why?" Amanda replied. "She's the only one who can reach your father 24/7. She's tough, protects him fiercely. She's on her way to his business now. She'll wait for you there," Tom said, handing her the address. Amanda thanked them and left. "What kind of woman would do what Adelia did to John?" Jody asked. "One who blames him for everything that went wrong in her life," Joanne replied. At the business, Helen Beard opened the door for Amanda and immediately turned on her phone's audio recorder. "The first question, Amanda. What do you know about the time of your disappearance?" Amanda took a deep breath, then shared what she recalled. "Mom woke us up early, said we were going on a surprise trip to New York. We had no idea what was happening. I found out later that some family members knew about her relationship with Ronald, but thought it was just a friendship." Helen nodded. "So you didn't realize anything was wrong?" "No," Amanda answered. "It wasn't until we were on the road that I noticed our phones were gone. Mom said we were moving because she got a promotion. I believed her, but I know now it was a lie." Helen listened carefully as Amanda continued. "She said the phones were canceled because of the move. We drove for over 20 hours in 2 days. Then, when we got to New York, Mom gave Miranda a new phone with a New York number. We didn't know it was Ronald's home we were headed to until we got there." Helen raised an eyebrow. "And what did you find when you arrived?" Amanda's voice tightened. "Ronald arranged everything for Mom's promotion. They planned it so they could be together. The family back home disposed of everything except photos, which we got later. When we were unpacking, Miranda and I found the adoption papers. Ronald explained that they were getting married and adopting us. He said that's why our dad wrote us out of his life." Helen absorbed the story. "I believe you, Amanda. I've heard much of this from the family. I also know that the school district gave Adelia your school record so you could register when you moved." Amanda nodded, anger and disbelief in her eyes. "Now the truth is coming out with Adelia being found." Helen nodded. "I've recorded our conversation. Once I send it to the FBI and your father, we'll grab an early dinner. Meanwhile, take a look at these statements," she said, handing Amanda notarized documents. "If your mom lied to you about your father, could she be lying about Ronald too?" Helen stepped into another room to forward the conversation, keeping an eye on Amanda from the doorway. Amanda sat quietly, reading through the statements, but not reaching out to anyone. Helen sent the conversation to John, then his civil lawyer, as Amanda's statement was incredibly damaging. Finally, she forwarded it to the FBI. Just as Helen was about to return to Amanda, John texted her, "I'll be there waiting for you." "Thank you," she replied, a sense of finality in her words. After a moment of watching Amanda, Helen returned to her. "Aunt Helen, do you have any idea why Mom told the family Dad was mistreating us?" Amanda asked softly, her voice tinged with confusion. Helen sighed before responding. "Your father was never well liked by the family, and your mother knew that. She probably used those accusations to justify her sudden disappearance. She also knew your father would search for you, and he did. He even tried to sue Bank of America to get your mother's whereabouts, though he lost in appeals." Helen paused, gathering her thoughts. "We didn't know about her marriage or the name change until your photo appeared in the paper. That's when your mom contacted the family in a failed attempt to cover up her mess. For 5 years, your dad's been a hunted man because of her. We almost lost him twice." Amanda's face tightened with concern. "How's my dad really doing?" Helen's expression softened. "He keeps to himself. He's lost a lot of weight, and the stress has turned most of his hair white. His Facebook was flooded with hate and threats, so he had to shut it down, even removing his name from the company page. They tried to destroy his business and life. He's learned to trust very few. He used to be outgoing, but now he's quiet and reserved. He's free, but not really. There are still people who want revenge." Amanda absorbed this in silence. "Does he have a girlfriend?" she asked, her voice almost hesitant. Helen's gaze became firm. "After what your mother did to him, would you date him?" she replied, heavy with the question. "He's spent 5 years defending himself against lies, unable to prove the truth." Amanda paused, then spoke softly. "Every time he tried to defend himself, it only made things worse. Their minds were made up. He was forced to walk alone." She took a shaky breath. "Our disappearance made it worse, gave her accusations more weight. Adelia and Ronald planned it perfectly. The only one who paid the price was Dad." Her voice cracked. "I feared he would damage himself." Helen's face softened, tears beginning to form. "Let's get something to eat," she suggested gently, changing the subject. As they walked toward the car, Amanda paused and turned to Helen. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For what?" Helen asked, surprised. "For standing by and loving my dad all these years," Amanda replied, her eyes filled with gratitude. Helen's eyes welled up, and the tears flowed freely. Amanda moved to comfort her. At Ruby Tuesdays, I sat in my car, watching for them to arrive. My emotions were a mess, trying to figure out what to say to my daughter, whom I hadn't seen in over 5 years. I'd replayed Helen's conversation with Amanda in my mind, believing it, but still struggling to accept it. When I saw them walk toward the door, my hands shook so badly I could hardly light my cigarette. Everything had changed. Amanda had grown into a beautiful woman. I saw so much of my own mother in her. It saddened me, remembering how my family had disowned me after my wife and daughters disappeared. After finishing my smoke, I turned off the car and prepared for the shortest yet longest walk of my life. The waitress who had served me a few weeks ago was now the hostess. She greeted me immediately. "Amanda's here," she said. I nodded and asked her to seat them in the back. "I'll take her to the booth," she said, "but she'll have her back to us when we approach." When we reached the booth, Helen saw me immediately and smiled. I walked up, sat beside her, and grabbed her hand for support. For the first time in over 5 years, I looked directly into my daughter's bright blue eyes. We just stared at each other, tears starting to fall. Sometimes words fail in moments like this. I had asked the hostess to bring us a bottle of house wine. When it arrived, the waitress said nothing. After pouring the first glasses, she left us alone. Amanda looked at me, surprised by how much I had changed. I'd lost at least 40 pounds. My face looked thinner and older, with my hair now silvery white. Many women would pay for that look at my age. Amanda stood up, and I followed. We met at the edge of the table and embraced in a tight hug. She cried out, "Dad!" I responded softly. Amma, my old nickname for her. In that moment, we both knew everything had changed. After calming down, we ordered food. Amanda seemed surprised by how differently I ate. Once a meat and potatoes man, I now ordered a catfish platter with the unlimited salad bar, refilling my plate multiple times. As Helen joined me at the salad bar, Amanda took the opportunity to speak privately. "Helen loves you, Dad, probably more than I do," Amanda said softly. "She grilled me like a drill sergeant before deciding I was honest. She wasn't going to let me hurt you again?" I sighed, regret weighing heavy on my voice. For 5 years, I didn't have a life to offer anyone. If a body had turned up, they would have thrown me in jail. Everyone thought I'd liquidated the three of you." Amanda nodded, understanding. "I know." Taking a deep breath, I continued. 3 years ago, after the second hospital stay from being attacked, I rewrote my will and left everything to Helen. I was ready to end it, but she brought me back from the edge. Helen returned and saw Amanda crying again. "What now?" she asked. "Just told her about the will and how you saved me," I replied. Now I had both women in tears. After lunch, we returned the rental car and drove to my home at Ryder Lake. Amanda was awestruck by the house, a spacious, open-plan home overlooking the lake with a covered breezeway and a stunning view. Amanda declined my offer to carry her luggage upstairs, likely wanting to give Helen and me some privacy. Once alone, Helen asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner how you felt?" "I couldn't," I admitted. "I didn't know if a body would show up. Not knowing was worse than knowing. Now that I'm free from that shadow, I can finally offer you a future." Helen smiled warmly. "I guess I'll put my house up for sale because there's no way I'll let you sell this place." I grinned, but when Amanda caught us kissing, I felt a pang of guilt. Still, we laughed it off, and the three of us sat down to catch up. I learned Amanda was working a dead-end job while pursuing her MBA online. She wasn't dating seriously. "Why not work with us?" I suggested. "We need fresh ideas, and you'd be a perfect fit. Start in a junior role, and we'll go from there." Amanda's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Helen nodded. "We'd start you at $45,000 a year." Amanda smiled through her tears. "Wow, I guess I'll need a place to live." "Stay here," I said. "There's plenty of room. But don't forget, chores still apply," I teased. Amanda laughed. "Why, Dad? You've always been a big part of my life," I replied. Amanda decided to fly back to PAC and return within the week. As we added phone numbers to our contact list, she got a text from Miranda. "Finally got my phone back. The FBI is holding me until they confirm the DNA test proves Ronald Peterson isn't my father. They showed me how the adoption papers were proven forged. I can't call but can text." Amanda replied, "I'm flying back tomorrow to PAC, moving home and joining Dad's firm. His number is under Sir." Miranda texted back, "Bring my laptop and phone. Leave the rest. Get a copy of today's US Today. Call me when you can." Helen followed me onto the patio. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Overwhelmed," I admitted, pulling her into a hug. Helen suggested taking Amanda to her place to gather some clothes, giving me time to reflect. I shared the gate code and house keys for copies. While they were gone, I let years of pent-up emotion pour out. It felt like a dam had burst. When they returned 2 hours later, I was smiling. They were too. I was on the patio grilling steaks with baked potatoes in the oven and a salad ready. Watching Helen and Amanda chat as they carried bags inside, I realized this was the beginning of a new chapter. After so much loss, we were finally moving forward, together. Late into a dinner, I found out that Amanda's flight was scheduled for 8 a.m. Sunday. Helen and I were planning to move more of her things the next day. I couldn't help but smile as I watched the girls eat more than usual. Afterward, we sat with coffee when my phone rang. The only one who had this number outside of our group was the FBI. I picked up and said, "Hello, Mr. Masters, it's Doug Drysdale." "Just a quick update," Doug began. "The DNA results are in, and it's confirmed you are Miranda's father. We got the results about 2 hours ago and told her. She wants to come home, so we've got her landing in Cape at 7:30 Monday morning." "That's fantastic," I said. "Helen and I will be there to pick her up." "Great. We figured Amanda had headed your way last night. Also, let her know her sister did see the article online," Doug added. By the way, when we broke the news to Ronald Peterson, he was crushed. Adelia had him convinced that Miranda was his. It doesn't change anything, though. He's still facing a long sentence. "Just one question?" I asked. "What will be my daughter's legal names now?" "They'll be Masters," Doug replied. "We got the court ruling on Friday morning. A copy of the federal court decision will be sent to your office on Monday, and that will allow you to change their IDs. With that, he ended the call. I could barely hold it together. The tears just started flowing. I couldn't speak, and both Helen and Amanda noticed, looking concerned. Fortunately, I pulled myself together quickly. "Miranda will be at the airport at 7:30 Monday," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "The DNA test confirmed she's mine. When we told Ronald Peterson, he was devastated. Adelia had him thinking she was his." "I knew it," Helen whispered. I turned to Amanda. "Did Adelia ever tell anyone the truth?" Amanda's expression grew serious. "I've got some bad news. You'll need to change your last name back to Masters. The court ruled you're adoption invalid. She threw her arms around me, sobbing. Peterson never felt right. We saw Amanda off as she headed back to New York to get her things. Afterward, Helen and I met her two brothers and their wives, plus Jackson, to move some of the furniture Helen wanted out of her house. Since I only had two of the bedrooms set up, there was plenty of room to store her stuff. The whole story was in the Sunday edition of Southeast Missourian. We met for breakfast at Hickory House, and everyone noticed the happiness on Helen's face. Her sisters-in-law joked that with Helen's cooking, I'd gained some weight in 6 months. The restaurant owner, an old friend, smiled and said, "Congrats, John. Breakfast's on me." We finished the move in one long day. Helen's sisters-in-law were clearly impressed with her new home. We offered to take them all out for dinner, but they declined, saying they'd prefer to come over for our first housewarming party instead. We arrived at the airport at 7:15 Monday morning, just in case the flight was early. Helen had let the necessary people know we wouldn't be in that day, and the response was, "We figured that from the Sunday paper." I saw Miranda coming down the steps of the small plane heading towards me. She was dressed in jeans and a tank top, and I almost didn't recognize her. The last time I saw her, she was a little girl with pigtails. Now she was a beautiful young woman walking toward me. As soon as she saw me, she ran straight at me. The sliding doors opened, and she rushed in. "Daddy!" she cried, leaping into my arms. Both of us were overwhelmed with emotion. We didn't care about the cameras. I heard Helen speaking to a reporter from KVO's 12 news station saying, "That's John Masters, and that's his youngest daughter, who half the town thought he had liquidated. Turns out they were abducted 5 years ago. The FBI has her mother and her partner in custody. This is the first time they've seen each other in over 5 years." We turned to the reporter, and Miranda spoke up. "I'm Miranda Masters. That's my father, John Masters. 5 years ago, my mother's family helped abduct us. They spread lies about our dad, claiming he misused us, but none of that was true. My mom's family may be involved in terrible things, but my dad never did that. Anyone who comes after him now will have to go through my sister and me. We are family, and we stand together. My mom told us when she divorced him that he got what he deserved. None of us deserved what she put us through. To me, he's not just my father. He's the most honest man I know." I introduced Miranda to Helen. Miranda hugged her and said, "Amanda and I talked a lot yesterday. We've learned a lot. It turns out our mom lied to Ronald just as much as she did to Dad. She craved attention so badly that she nearly destroyed 5 lives. We know you and Dad are planning to marry, and as far as Amanda and I are concerned, we want to forget the Helen part." "Okay, Mom?" Helen teared up. "You couldn't have said it better, Miranda." Miranda smiled at her. "Helen, I'll agree to that if you promise to be one of my bridesmaids." "How about we go grab some breakfast?" I suggested. Miranda nodded. "Can we go to Denny's? Are they still open?" "They are, but Huddle House is closer and serves the same kind of food," I said. "Is that okay?" It was, and I was surprised by how much Miranda could eat. Watching her, I thought it might actually be cheaper to send her to a boarding school. It was still hard to believe I had a life again. My 2 daughters were back in my world in a way I'd never imagined. My house no longer felt like a house. It finally felt like home. Later, while we were shopping at Macy's, I deliberately wandered off. I couldn't bear listening to the girls talk about underwear and other personal stuff. By the time they realized I'd slipped away, I was almost back. Helen asked where I'd gone, and I said, "Just the washroom." I found myself stuck watching Miranda try on clothes. For some reason, she was looking for my approval. Honestly, I thought she'd look great in anything, but she insisted on hearing my thoughts. $300 later, we walked out with 2 shopping bags. Back at the house, Helen proudly showed Miranda the 4 bedrooms upstairs that were now fully furnished. Miranda seemed to really like the room that had Helen's old master bedroom set, which made Helen beam with happiness. Later, we sat on the patio, trying to enjoy the coolness before the afternoon heat kicked in. The women sipped on iced tea while I relaxed with a cold beer. After a while, I stood up, walked over to Helen, and pulled a small box from my pocket. Dropping to one knee, I caught her off guard. "Since I haven't asked you properly," I said, opening the box with the 3-ring set inside, "will you marry me once my divorce is finalized?" "Yes, of course," she replied, her eyes welling up with tears. Miranda snapped a picture of the moment and immediately texted it to Amanda. Yes, it fits. I had gotten Helen's ring size from her brother, so it was a pleasant surprise that the ring fit perfectly. About half an hour later, Helen's phone rang, and both Miranda and I exchanged worried glances when we saw her tear up unexpectedly. She handed me the phone, and as soon as I heard Amanda's voice, I knew what was going on. It was my eldest daughter calling. "Congrats, Dad," Amanda said, her voice crackling slightly over the line. "Are you on the road yet?" "I left at 4 yesterday," she continued. "Been driving nonstop since then. It's a lot quieter at night, and the cops aren't as active. I was cruising just over 100, so the miles flew by." "Tell my sister I got her stuff," I replied. "I will," Amanda said. "How much farther?" I asked her what time it was on her end. "About 2 p.m. Why?" "I need you to guide me in," she answered. "I just got off the off-ramp at Cape." I sent her the directions, and I couldn't decide whether I should feel proud or worried. It looked like she had driven nearly 24 hours straight. As the sound of a car approaching the driveway reached our ears, both girls rushed to the door to greet Amanda. When she stepped out of the car, she looked tired, but otherwise fine. And then it hit me hard. I was seeing all 3 of my girls together. The first thing Amanda did was check out Helen's engagement ring. At that moment, the house phone rang, and I rushed to answer it. "John, we've been slammed today," Chris said. "Some of the clients we lost because of the rumors are coming back, and we've got a ton of new ones calling in. A lot of them are from out of state. If this keeps up, we're going to need more staff, and we need them now." "My daughter, Amanda, will be starting as a junior next week," I told him. "She's green, but she's aiming for an MBA. "Can I have her on my team?" Chris asked. "It'll be long hours, but she'll learn fast." "Sure," I agreed. Chris Acker was a go-getter. I hired him right after he graduated at the top of his class. Like all of us, he had to learn the hard way, but with time, he had more than proven himself. He quickly realized that business theory didn't always work in the real world, and he wasn't afraid to admit it. He taught his team by doing. If someone made a mistake, he would step in, explain where they went wrong, and make sure they understood. In his eyes, the only wrong question was the one you didn't ask. "Chris, Helen and I will be taking the rest of the week off," I said. "We've got a lot to deal with. Our engagement, the girls coming home, and a few legal matters to clear up, including getting Miranda enrolled in school." "Engaged? Wow, that's great news," Chris said. "By the way, we got a courier letter from the FBI. Can you swing by and pick it up at 5? "Thanks for the reminder," I replied. "I'll be there." At 4:30, we headed into town. We had decided to have our first official family meal at Red Lobster, a place the girls had chosen. I pulled up in front of the office and asked Amanda if she wanted to check out where she'd be working. "Sure," she said, so we all went inside. When we entered, the receptionist greeted us and led us to the largest conference room. There, we found a big cake and a banner that read, "Congratulations." Amanda met her new boss, and everyone was introduced to my new family. It didn't go unnoticed that both my daughters were already calling Helen Mom. We finally made it to the restaurant around 6:30, just in time for their annual all-you-can-eat shrimp special. My daughters lost count after 140 shrimp and couldn't believe I was now eating raw lemons, like they were oranges. That night, as we sat together, we went over the court ruling. The first thing I noticed was that the document looked like something you could easily create on LegalZoom.com, no lawyer required. The second point was that an expert had concluded that the signature of John Allen Masters had been traced over. The ink breaks weren't consistent with someone's natural signature flow, and there were discrepancies in every instance. The third glaring detail was that I had never used my full middle name when signing anything. The final clue was that the signature on the document had been dated after they had left Missouri. On the second page, the court ruled that Amanda Peterson and Miranda Peterson were never their legal names. In the eyes of the law, they were and always had been Amanda Masters and Miranda Masters. As a result, all official records would be changed to reflect that. The week was spent untangling legal issues. First, we went to the Social Security office, then to the state attorney's office to restore Amanda and Miranda's birth certificates to their original names, and finally to the DMV for new driver's licenses. For me, the most satisfying moment was sitting across from the school principal, who, 5 years ago, had dismissed me so coldly as I registered Miranda for 11th grade. On Thursday, I picked up new cell phones for the girls. Friday morning, Helen and I took Amanda and Miranda to the Ford dealership in Jackson. With Helen's approval, I traded in her car along with Amanda's old one. Both ladies drove home brand new 2019 Ford Escapes on lease-to-own plans through my company. I also handed Amanda a check for the trade-in value credited to our down payment. Later that day, my divorce lawyer called. For the first time in 5 years, my daughters and I were scheduled to attend court on Monday at 1 p.m. I asked Helen if she'd come with us. "Damn right," she replied. In court, we sat before Judge Donald McDonald while Adelia appeared on a monitor. Without her usual polish, she looked haggard, and the orange jumpsuit did her no favors. The judge turned to her lawyer. "Does your client have anything to say about the contempt charge?" Her lawyer responded weakly. "She claims she didn't understand she needed to be in court today." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you remind her repeatedly during the settlement discussions?" "Yes," the lawyer admitted. "Then are you incompetent enough to believe her?" The judge retorted. "No," the lawyer muttered. "How does your client plead?" "No contest," the lawyer said. The judge's tone turned icy. "I sentence her to 5 years to be served consecutively with any federal time." The lawyer protested. "Your Honor, isn't that extreme?" "Not in my view," the judge replied coldly. "Though she can appeal," the judge continued. "As for the divorce, it is granted in favor of Mr. Masters. All remaining marital assets are forfeited to him, as she abandoned her minor daughters when she left the state." Turning to my lawyer, he added, "Draft the divorce decree, including a waiver for the waiting period. I think your client has waited long enough." "My client has one final request," my lawyer interjected. "He recently got engaged to Miss Helen Beard and would like you to officiate their civil ceremony." Helen and the girls gasped in delight as I smiled knowingly. My lawyer and I had planned for this possibility. The judge beamed. "It would be my honor. Congratulations to both of you. Long overdue." Adelia's shocked face on the monitor was priceless. It seemed she had expected a slap on the wrist, not 5 years in prison or news of my engagement to her cousin. The judge adjourned court with a bang of the gavel, then approached to shake my hand. I introduced him to Helen and the girls formally. As we left, he grinned. "John, we need to go fly fishing soon before the heat gets unbearable." Outside, the excitement from the 3 most important women in my life was overwhelming. After years of silence, their chatter was deafening, but joyful. Then I saw a couple quietly slipping away. It was my parents. Their presence hit me hard. My father's parting words echoed, "Forgiveness is easy, forgetting is not." At home, wedding planning took over. Helen listed her house for sale, Amanda fit in seamlessly at work, and Miranda reconnected with old friends. Masters Consulting was swamped with new clients, including 2 corporations needing complete restructuring. Amanda amazed us all by spotting overlooked issues costing a client millions in potential sales. Within 3 weeks, she turned it around, boosting their revenue significantly. Watching her succeed made me proud. It felt like life was finally coming back together. One night, Helen and I were lying in bed, just cuddling. She was adjusting to being a mom again, and I was getting used to being a dad. "You know, dear, my biological clock is ticking," Helen said, gazing at me with those dreamy eyes. "How long should we wait before trying for 1 or 2 of our own?" I hadn't really thought about it, but after everything Helen had been through with me, I knew I couldn't refuse. "Let me put it this way," I replied. "As long as you're not showing in our wedding pictures, I'll leave it up to you." I don't think I need to explain why neither of us got much sleep that night. We exchanged vows on Mother's Day. Amanda was the maid of honor. Miranda and another niece were maids of honor. Chris Acker was my best man, and my nephews were ushers. It was a small ceremony in our backyard with the lake as the backdrop. Helen's brothers had prepared the yard, and the judge married us beneath a spring flower arbor. The men wore blue jeans, cowboy hats, and matching boots. The women went all out. Helen wore a traditional white gown, and her bridesmaids wore yellow dresses. Her family provided a fantastic barbecue spread, and our patio became a lively dance floor with live music. Life moved forward. Adelia and Ronald's criminal trial was underway, and Ronald had filed for divorce. My civil lawyer was negotiating with their lawyers and Bank of America's legal team. As Father's Day approached, I knew my wife and daughters were planning something, but I had no idea what. On Father's Day, Helen and I were up at dawn fishing on the lake. The fish were biting, and we reached our limit in less than an hour. Just before we headed back, Helen handed me a card. Inside it read, "Happy Father's Day, Daddy. We're pregnant, and it's a boy." I was so excited. I flipped the canoe, and we lost everything. Our fishing poles and tackle box. We ended up drenched, but the girls had already been told, and they thought it was hilarious. Things settled down, but the real change came when our son was born. He arrived screaming, weighing 7 pounds. When I called my mom to tell her, she rushed to the hospital. I led her straight to Helen, who was holding our son. "His name is Colin Richard," I said. My mother broke down. Colin Richard was her grandfather's name. As for my father and me, we still haven't spoken. He would need to come to me, and as of now, he hasn't. But each new day brings progress, and life goes on.